Tom, she had on this list, I don't know if you looked through it or not, but she had that Chris had COVID. Is that, did she get,
Chris,
well, not Chris. She wrote Chris, but it was,
Kay,
Kay.
yeah, she still got it.
She still got it? Is it going through down
I
there?
got the one lane closed off.
How many did they say about
They
it?
didn't say.
Okay.
The 100 went off to the left.
Dad, do you have any more of those?
No.
I can give you mine after I.
Let me,
make sure I
go down through this. A couple things then again, and then we'll get to the cancer list and try to get the updates as best we can with that. I saw where Randy Shoemaker was out of the pulpit yesterday, and so of course him and Karen had COVID, was going around with that. But he said they're in recovery, so that's all good with that.
That's what Kay is. She's in recovery. But she's still got it.
And David Ford, who had it, is recovering, and he's supposed to go ahead and start with his process, that they're going to get him ready for the treatment on that targeting there in his prostate where that cancer is at. Michael Catt is having a treatment today on his start that. I don't know how many treatments he's going to have. I know David Ford said his is 9 weeks with that. Rhonda Rose, who had the 2 tumors in her lung, they took the top half of that, and she come out of surgery and is doing really well. So that's all good. She's down at Winchester.
Good.
I checked on that, Georgie, about we got it while the pastors were meeting last night. We got a text about Matt Landis, and he was coming back from Florida with family on the Leatherman side, and he lost use of his limbs
Oh,
and was found half paralyzed, and so they took him to the emergency room, and they was trying to discern whether it was kind of something like a viral infection. You know how that hits when they, being at Disney World, who knows. But anyway, we didn't get any updates on that. We were just praying for him, and we'll continue on that. Talked with Pam today. She got home Saturday, and she wasn't with us on Kaiser broadcast, but she did get to watch a little bit of Fox's Hollow, and we'll see if she joins us here for this evening. Right now in the Senate, they are debating back and forth. Schumer added a amendment, and there was another amendment added, so they're back and forth on that HR 8404 that I told you. I didn't tell you guys there, Kaiser, and I forgot, but that's the Marriage Act that they're trying to pass. That's going to undo any biblical standard of marriage. It's not going to be as what we define as one man, one woman, as the biblical standard. They just want to do it all away so they can do whatever they want in marriage, and to give rights to the LGBT and all that. So that's on the floor right now. I touted that the last couple of weeks as Schumer brought it up, but that's going on right now, and I caught just a little bit of it back 6:20, whatever it was. They should vote on it tonight, and then they'll have another vote later on. So anyway, that's a couple of the updates that I wanted to pass along to you. Carter Conlon, who's many of us are following him now since he's been with us. He's over in Europe right now doing a couple services. So if you can remember him, just to keep him in prayer for that. All right, I'm going to read down through the cancer list and just give out any updates or info as we come across that. First one, Scott Fury. Okay.
December's when they said they would find out if he had to have anything else.
Okay.
And so I don't know anything right now.
All right. Martha Fairbanks.
doing real good. I talked to Denise the other day, and she said she's doing. Remember, I told her she got back to work and she got her eyesight back. And
Okay.
yeah, she's doing real good.
I had in remission was all I had
Yeah.
with that. Michael Catt, I shared with him, he had treatment today. Francine Lyons,
Okay.
no updates. Jackie, you want to share about Julie Carey's update?
Finding it, I'm looking at it
80%?
Wednesday, she said she got good news on the CT scan, 80% reduction. But did see a nodule adjacent from it that's suspicious. She said, just please keep her in the prayers and thank you for the prayers.
Okay.
Jackie, is that the lady down in Paris Creek?
Aubrey Amoruso, much better than what she had done when she was having all those difficulties and issues. So she's still taking the treatments out in Chicago. So again, prayer continues with that. Sandy Eichenberger, still remission. Betty Metz.
Marshall has been fine to call Baldy the other day and ask, he calls Baldy, but he never asks about Betty. But she's taken, I think she's already had 5 or 6 treatments. So she's going through the treatments.
Treatments, okay.
Yeah.
Bonnie Rader. That's Carl's, one of Carl's. Ella James. I haven't been down. Maggie's been talking to her, but no other updates with that. I still have Todd, even though we got that his was good reports on that. And then his sister Misty with the brain tumor and drug trial. I didn't see if she put an update on that.
No, she decides living with brain cancer.
Okay. Richard Adams.
I'm gonna have to call Joan, but I told you he opted out of doing anything, so I'll have to call Joan and see where that's at now.
All right. Bobby Ritter.
Same.
Same. Tom Bittinger.
I don't know, talk to Eleanor.
Okay. Ruth Swope. Joe Maxwell.
I haven't heard anything.
Katie Kessner.
She had surgery, but I haven't heard anything. Yeah, Hannah hasn't heard anything either.
Rico Thomas. Thompson, sorry.
No, they're still testing for allergies. I don't know if they're gonna do body space. I need to ask his mother.
Okay. Robin Wright. I think
That's Rocky's sister. Yeah, she's still doing treatments, but Lana says she's doing good. So
treatments, okay. Carl Hartman. Betsy Martin. Paula Hamrick. These are Marshes.
Yeah, these are Marshes. I need to call her.
Already gave update on Rhonda Rose. Galen Kane.
Galen Kane.
That was Sue's.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Kim Likens.
Her report came back benign.
Right. And I guess we should take her off just because that's, again, but I keep them on here just with what I got. Dave Wilson.
I don't know anything.
Malachi, Freddie Emmert Jr.
I do know about Fred Emmert. He had a CAT scan on Thursday, waiting on results.
Okay. And then I gave you update on David Ford. Any others?
Mm-hmm.
Keep the baby that was up the road here in prayer, the family. Again, ups and downs with that, with the baby. Travel piece and that. What else?
I want to know how Hannah's doing.
She's better.
Okay.
There is another baby that was born that's from Oakland. It was a little boy. He was born at 23 weeks. And he only weighed 1 pound 9 ounces. He is in the NICU and could be in there for 6 months. And then the mother was also in the SICU herself with complications, but they haven't updated anything else since then.
Is this someone you know or just someone? Okay.
Well, I know of her from living up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a name?
Yeah, the little baby's name is Charlie, and then the mom's name is Georgette.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
Ken and I had dermatologist appointments on Monday after we left here on Friday. And she took something off of Hannah and had to have a stitch. Well, she took a mole off of me, she took my glasses off. She said, "You see that?" I said, "Yeah, but I really couldn't because my glasses are."
Right.
She took it off, and it's back here. And they called today and wanted to know if I could come back to discuss my results tomorrow or something. I said, "No, I can't." I said, "I'll be back down there on the 15th for a cardiologist appointment." And she said, "Well, I'll have a doctor to call you." So the doctor called me, and she said, "I just want to tell you that is melanoma. And she said, "It's the good kind." She said, "I hate to say that, but it's the good kind." She said,
Good.
She said, "I think we caught it in time because I know you said your dad had melanoma." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, I was trying to figure out when I could come back. She said, "Well, you come in that day." She said, "If you be here on the 15th at 9 o'clock, she said, we're going to go in deeper
Just make sure they got
to
it
make
all.
sure they
Yeah,
got it all."
Okay. Did they freeze that or just cut it out?
They cut it out.
Okay. Well, we knew that. Tom, you got your knife out there?
Yeah, I got one.
Truck knife, sorry, here, you got
Okay.
washed it.
So you go back to 15th to
Yeah,
have that and then
I
phone.
got it.
And what about Hannah's? You said that they just was to send that away to
Yeah.
check it?
Did a stitch, so
Okay.
she'll be fine. But there's mine.
Oh, my.
Oh,
I can't see that.
Yeah. You'll be able to see it when she cuts more out of it.
well, it looks like it's healing up nice though.
Really.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they heal up nice, it's a good sign.
Tom, you supposed to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got two of them. One, I got a doctor's appointment Friday for my right shoulder to see when they can fix your rib.
Yeah, frog, swallowed a frog.
And then my Aunt Cindy, I haven't heard anything out of her. I've sent her texts and called her. I don't know what's going on with her. She's down in North Carolina and I have no way of finding out. And I have only one phone number.
Okay.
She's mom's sister.
And that
Last one.
just was trying to reach out. You couldn't get a hold of her. Is that what it was? Okay.
And she always,
Always responds.
always.
And no one else down around there. He suggests, but call the police and do a well check.
Trying to give her a little time.
Yeah, okay. And your shoulder, is that just to redo or is that something surgery?
It's all tore up.
Okay. For the ligaments and tendons and all that. Okay.
I'm more worried about her because of Al and her both. She's 73 and he's almost 80.
Okay.
So they both could be laying dead down there. Nobody knows about it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. A well check too. If there's something, never know in those circumstances. All right. Anybody else?
Is there an update on Frankie?
He's all
He
well.
is, yeah, he's doing very, very
Yes,
well.
I was gonna say, somebody told me he's really doing good. Yeah.
So, but boy, had she had her hands full. Just keep poor Betty in prayer. We had Frank have that illness, and Josh got rushed to
Oh,
WVU because he had gotten a tooth pulled, and of course he's a bad diabetic,
yes.
and he had a bad infection there, and she's in the hospital with Frank, and here her grandson's calling saying, "Grandma, they're sending me out to Morgantown." Well, then one of the babies that she had ended up getting sick. I mean, she's just had one
Yeah.
thing after, and she's holding it all together. Now Frank's home, which is a blessing. That's one less stress off of her, but she's
She's
just.
still taking care of him.
I've been praying for her because she's
No,
just
Frank's
carrying
fine.
a heavy load.
I knew Frankie.
Yeah, they stay down there. And then one other, Matraca. She had septic back in the beginning of the spring, or maybe in the winter, into the spring. And it's been screwing around with her sugar really bad. And she's down to 130 some odd pounds. I mean, she's lost a ton of weight. They can't keep her sugar under control. And her body's
So,
the sugar is eating her body. I mean, they have no idea what's going on with it. And it's just eating our way.
Mm.
Don't have any idea.
No answers on that, okay.
It's all to do with that septic and their sugar.
I wish
Sugar
I'd get a
spiking
cure for
or
that.
bottoming out?
Both ways.
It just fluctuates,
It
okay.
just goes either way.
When I, several months ago, asked for prayer for Kim Bruniger, about her sugar levels. She got that thing that sticks on your arm,
Mhm.
I forget what it's called.
Yeah, I've seen them
But she said
advertised.
she's been doing quite well
Yeah.
with it.
Okay.
So what Matrice's got, so she's been keeping track of hers.
Kind of balances it out a little bit better, I think.
Well, it helps. She's got the pump, but it's still, her body's just eating her body.
Yeah,
That's what
something
it
else is going against that, right?
Yeah, there's something else.
Not coming back from that septic unless there's infection there somewhere still working.
I have no problem with it.
Okay. We'll pray here and then we'll get to the study. Pastors met last night, had just had a town of fellowship and a little bit of conversations to talk about what we want to do for the close of the year. Christmas is on Sunday, as I said, so we got Kaiser High Auditorium. And so the churches that, again, the 5 churches that we've been coming together praying, almost all of them have signed on. They just want to do one joint service
Yes.
in the community. And they're going to put out to the other pastors and churches via Facebook and a letter and however they want to do that. So that's, just pray for that. Again, it's an opportunity. People may not come to the church, but they'll come to a community service like that. Families might come together, do that, and then go back and do their family things for dinner or whatever. It won't impact Fox's Hollow and won't impact our candlelight services on the 24th. So keep that in prayer. And so that's at 10 a.m. They're going to do that. So just pray into that. And then when they get the flyer for announcement, we'll post it on Facebook and you guys can share it and invite with others that may participate in that. Okay. All right. Philip, you want to lead us in prayer for all these needs and cancers and requests and
I have to apologize. Rebecca asked when we were driving to school, she had a special request for a child that recently has discovered they have a seizure disorder. She didn't want any of the details to go out, but just wanted prayer
for
and
them?
wanted that on the list.
Okay.
Just,
Unspoken.
yeah.
All right. Philip?
Father God, we just come before you in a time of need. Lord, we've made our request known to you, God. We've discussed it here, Lord, we have this list of cancers, those that have other illnesses. God, we just bring them before you, Lord, because you are the great physician. So, Lord, we just ask that you would outstretch your right hand. Father, begin to restore those that are on beds of affliction this night. Father, I ask that you would, out of that, be glorified to the highest. Father, also would you be with us in this hour that as we study your word, Lord, would you again just speak to us through your word. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Just as far as announcements is that again, I lost all of November for Thursday night hour of prayer and something was going on each week, and of course Thanksgiving. So, but I don't foresee anything in the month of December. So Thursday night, I'm going to try to get back to doing that Thursday night hour of prayer and see where that takes us as we go into the first of the year. This is the 1 month away from the 100 hours of prayer. So we're doing the 15 minutes and the 30-minute slots to start taking. That starts December 28th at 8 a.m. I always have to say this because we got time zones involved with this, Eastern Standard Time. And that'll take us right up to January 1st at noon. So if you can take a couple days, 15 minutes on those slots, that'd be greatly appreciated. And then started Advent season, and our gifts are going to go for a missionary family that's in India, and we'll have updates with them and keep them in prayer. And any of our financial gifts that we collect for the month of December will go to them. Okay, that's normally our Lottie Moon Christmas offering.
Yeah,
Okay. Man, there's just so much. And then, again, I think there's no other easy way to do this except to start 5-10 minutes early, get through these lists so that we got our time to biblically do study and conversation. Okay. So that's what we're going to have to try to do with that. All right. You guys, questions? Anything you've read, heard, want to talk about, ask, discuss?
Yes. So I was reading there in Genesis where it's at the point where Jacob was ready to leave Laban after doing his 7 years continually serving him. My question was, why was it so necessary for Jacob, like when the angel visited Jacob and was like, it's time for you to leave Laban. Like, why was it necessary for him to leave after so long, like being there?
Okay. He served 7 years for Rachel, and he got, and I don't know whether this is the theological term, he got bamboozled that night, and he ended up with Leah. And so then he worked another 7 years for Rachel to officially have her. And so that was 14 years. And then he worked 6 years for the flocks, for the sheep, the goats, and all that stuff. He worked 6 years for that. So we're at 20 years, 2 decades that he worked for two women and flocks. Okay. And he had been promised that when he left his father Isaac and Rebekah. Remember, Esau said, I'm going to wait till dad's dead and then I'm going to kill you and take everything, because he got bamboozled by the mother for the blessing, remember?
Yeah.
And so Rebekah came up with a plan. You go to my brother Laban and get away from Esau before he takes your head off. And so they sent him away. And that night, and I don't remember the chapter, 28 or somewhere there, it says is that Jacob made a pillow of rocks. And that night he had the dream, the vision of Jacob's ladder. And he saw angels ascending and descending upon that place. And he said, this is none other than the house of God. And he said, if the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, now it wasn't his God at that point, if the God of Isaac and Abraham will keep me and bring me back to this place safe and sound, then you'll be my God. That was the vow that he made. So 20 years later, he comes back to that, and God speaks to him and says, it's time for you to go back. I did my part. I kept you. You do your part, because he was supposed to be in the promised land. Esau had to be removed, because at that particular time, Esau was still running the show, because Jacob was too old with that. Or Isaac was too old for that. I'll get all the names shuffled and get you all confused.
We understand.
So God speaks to him directly and says that. But what ends up happening is he doesn't handle that situation right. Rachel steals Laban's gods. She was a thief. She stole the false gods, the idols. And then instead of Jacob saying to Laban, the Lord said for me to go back home, he waited till Laban took off 3 days' journey, and then he snuck out in incognito. So then Laban comes to pursue him, to track him down, and they have that meeting at Mount Gilead. And that night before that, God comes to Laban and says, you be very careful how you talk to my servant. Don't you speak a positive word or a negative word to him. And so Laban comes scared to death with that warning, and he says, it is out of my hands to do anything, but I don't like the way you did this. And they ended up having a piecemeal kind of thing, but it was because God said, and that's the reason he was obeying that after 20 years. Okay? Anything else? All right. Deuteronomy 5. Now, technically, we left off at 41 of chapter 4. 41 down through 49 is the divisions that we talked about, the land and the maps that I had with the maps of all those things. 41 through 43 is the cities of refuge. Definition of a city of refuge, anybody know real quick? Nobody? If you killed somebody, homicide, by accident, and you didn't do it with intent, you didn't do it with maliciousness, you didn't do it out of hate, it wasn't premeditated, and they always use the example in the Old Testament, if you're cutting wood and the axe handle flies off, what do they call that today in court? Manslaughter. Axe handle flies off, hits some guy in the head and kills him. It was an accident. God set 6 cities, 3 on the east side of the Jordan, 3 on the west side of the Jordan, and said, go to those cities, and as long as you're inside the city, you're safe. If you go outside the walls, then the avenger of blood can track you down and kill you. If it was a family member or something like that, and again, but if it was an accident, safe haven there. And you had to stay there. Anybody remember this? How long?
7 years.
37 total, 40.
Try. What is this? Multiple choice? You had to stay there as long as the high priest was alive. When the high priest died, then you could leave and go back to your original home city of that. That was the command. That was the law. Okay. So they pick out 3 cities on the east side, namely Bezer, verse 43, which was in the country of the Reubenites, Ramoth of Gilead, of the Gadites, we just talked about Gilead, and Golan in Bashan of the Manassites. And again, all those cities are relevant today. Where is Syria and Israel always fighting over? The Golan Heights in that. So you see those things right there. Then 44, which is the last section of this chapter, and this is the law which Moses set before the children of Israel. And you see these laws, verse 45, these are the testimonies, statutes, judgments, and you see all these terminologies of what God gave to them, do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, moral law, natural laws. These were the things that they were supposed to teach, to learn, to practice, and to do. New Testament, we're reduced to 2 commandments. What are they?
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
What?
Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Well, that's the second one. What's the first one?
I know God before me.
That's the 10 commandments.
Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and thy soul and thy mind.
Mind, soul, body, and strength. And then the second one, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The 10 commandments, which we're going to get to here in the beginning of chapter 5. So the statutes, testimonies, commandments of how you were supposed to live, how you were supposed to dress, how you were supposed to act, how you were supposed to do your sacrifices. It covered almost everything in your life. Now, simple stuff, not hard press, and they couldn't keep them. They couldn't do them. So today you got laws, and again, they're always changing the laws, so you always have to keep updated with that. But most of these things, what we call about moral laws, things that you do, things that you don't do, the way that you conduct yourself. New Testament, Jesus come out in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, and he preached the Sermon on the Mount. And he started off with the Beatitudes. And as Ravenhill said, the Beatitudes are attitudes. Blessed are they. And he's got a whole list of the blessings. And then he's got a whole list of the cursings. And then he's got a whole list of those things just to say, if a nation, if a family, if a person will do these things rightly, God's watching and God will reward you. If you don't keep them, then you're in trouble. And there's a punishment, a judgment, and those kind of things that come along with that. So that takes us down, verse 46, 47. It is the possession of the land for the 2.5 tribes that was going to stay on the east side of the Jordan River. And that closes us out. Maps, you can go and you can find those rivers and those mountains and that location. I had that map out and showed that to you back when we started this to give you a little bit of an understanding about where this is at in reference to the maps of Israel, Dead Sea, and all those things. So we start into chapter 5, and again, the 10 commandments are actually listed from verse 6 down through 21. Okay. Now, again, Ten Commandments are in Exodus chapter 20 and in Deuteronomy chapter 5. You're supposed to know the Ten Commandments 1 through 10. Okay? And again, if you get them confused a little bit, there's no biggie on that, but you are to know the Ten Commandments. It's like having a nursery class and setting the little kids down and teaching them. They learn these things, but if you never teach them, was you ever made to learn the Ten Commandments?
Mhm.
Most were not. Most never said. I mean, was you ever taught the 12 apostles? Was you ever taught the 12 children of Israel? Was you ever taught the books of the Bible? These are just things, again, sitting in a Sunday school class or a vacation Bible school class, was that these things to teach. Teach the verses, Bible verses. Again, going into the new year, one of your priorities should be memorize verses. How many verses did you memorize this year? How many memorized one verse? And it doesn't count for you to have a coffee cup with it on there. Okay.
What about two
What's your verse?
Peter 5:7. Cast all your worries onto him because he cares for you.
Very good. Very good. Any others? Just that one?
There's one, but I can't. I have it on like my board, and it's
Well, you got a cheat sheet too. Okay.
I'll touch you up.
it's on my.
Jackie is a bad influence on you. What is it? Can't remember.
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Philip, you
I had
got
Isaiah 59, but of course, now you ask me, it's like completely out of my mind. Because I have it like on a sticky note.
for flood of evil?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't recall right now, but
The Lord has become my strength, no, salvation. I know it, but it's all out of order.
All right. You learn it and then text us about 11 o'clock tonight. I'll have that. Anybody else? Verses? Did you remember? Got cramp? Charlie Horse is just locked in. All right. Chapter 5 then, let's start down through this. And Moses called all of Israel, said unto them, Hear, O Israel, and again, here's our terminology, statutes and judgments, which is the same as these other words, commandments, law, all these are slightly different words, meanings, but all one and the same thing. It is the law of God, the command of God, the word of God, which I speak in your ears this day that you may. Here's your responsibility, 3 things. You are to learn them, you are to keep them, and you are to do them. Now that's again, repeat from most of Deuteronomy and the rest of the scripture. Learn them, keep them, and do them. That obliterates the excuse that most of our society is today of what? What's most people's excuses today?
They don't have time.
They don't have time, but they just don't know, do they? If you talk to people about salvation, if you talk to people about eternity, and they're going to look at you and talk to you, say, I've never been told this. I don't know this. It's ignorance. But now even, the old adage of the state police pulls you over and says, you were speeding. And you said, well, I didn't know what the speed limit was. What's the officer going to say to you?
You should have.
Huh?
You should have.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse. God's going to say the same thing on Judgment Day. Every one of us have got Bibles. Every one of us has got an intellect. Every one of us has got an education to study to show ourselves approved unto God. Now, some people have photogenic minds. Some people memorize easier and better and all that. Some for people it's a struggle. But you still have those 3 objectives. You are to learn, you are to keep, and you are to do. And our responsibility to each other is the questions that we often ask one another. How are you doing? How are you doing keeping the law? How are you doing this day in and day out? And we see people, they start to backslide, meaning they start to go away. It's not that they don't know, it's that they're having trouble keeping. They're discouraged. They're weary. They're distracted. There's other things more important. And they start going away from the things of God. And you say, how do you know this? Well, church attendance starts to become hit and miss. When you ask them about their Bible readings, you say, well, I haven't picked up my Bible for 3 weeks. When you talk about prayer, and they say, well, I'm not praying now as strong as I was back in the summer. You begin to see signs of that they're backsliding. They're not keeping and they're not doing. This is the whole problem of the church. we have not been taught. We haven't learned these things. And I know I sound like a poly repeat parrot over and over with these things, but it's to get it in you that you can say, we heard it, we learned it. I can't come behind you with a whip or a cattle prodder or a hot iron and say, do it, because that doesn't accomplish anything. If you don't have the heart, if you don't have the joy to do it, what good does it do for me to browbeat you about doing it? If you don't have the love for the Lord, again, if you love me, John 14, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So it's a love relationship. It's not about you just doing it to keep me off your back or God off your back. That's not the right way to look at that. It's that your love relationship with Christ is in jeopardy. You got an affection for something else that's more important than God. And that's going to take us to our first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, which is what you quoted. So that's verse 1. Learn it, keep it, do it. And again, we're going to see that repeated. We've already seen that keep and do part of that. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. And again, we've covered that every time we read the word. Covenant is an agreement between two entities. This time it's God and his children. When you became a born-again Christian, you entered into a covenant. God offered you salvation, redemption, everlasting life with him if you would believe, receive, keep, and obey. Okay? Your responsibility, Lord, I will serve you all the days of my life, and I will be your child, and you will be my God. That's the covenant that you entered into. God doesn't break his side, but we're prone to break our side. And that's why we always have to be, where are you at? What are you doing? Are you on track? Are you prayed up, studying up, and be where you're supposed to be? So that's the covenant. The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us, who are all this day here alive this day. Again, as this chapter, Deuteronomy, begins, that previous rebellious generation to come up out of Egypt, they're all dead. Their fathers. So this new covenant is with this generation. God comes to every generation and offers them. 1945, post World War II, right after the signing of that, there was a covenant that America entered into. In 55, 56, Korean conflict and post following that, we had another covenant. In 1963, when Kennedy was shot, there was another covenant. And again, we're not getting better at that point. We're getting worse. 1970, I would say, what year did Nixon resign? 71, 72? 72. 1972, we came upon another threshold. 1980, Reagan comes in. Moral majority with Reverend Falwell. Another covenant was offered and extended to us. And again, we're not getting better. Now we've got in the 60s, 70s, 80s, now we've got the sexual revolution. We've got a rebellious generation of younger children. We've got the hippie movement. We've got, at the same parallel, the hippies, we've got the Jesus movement happening. And then we've got drugs and cocaine and all that happening underneath, which again just goes coast to coast in all directions. And now 90s, probably you'd say 94 to 96, where you'd say Clinton with that, and then 2000, it has to be 2001 with 9/11. It was one of our last moments that we had. Then we had 2005, we had Hurricane Katrina. 2007, 2008, we had the worldwide economic collapse of the banking system, which again was just propped up with toothpicks. And now it's all getting ready to crash again in that. And then this is where we're at. Every event in history, God comes back and says, now will you return to me? I made a covenant with you, made a covenant with your fathers. Where are you at? I'm keeping my part, but you're not keeping your part. And he calls us into account with this, just like he did them. He made a covenant with them when they come out of Egypt, and he took them down to Mount Sinai. He did the spectacular, He come down on the mount. They heard him audibly. They saw the fire, and they saw the glory of God. And what did they do for 40 years? Murmur, rebel, sin. I mean, it didn't change them one bit. Verse 4, the Lord talked with you face to face in the mount, out of the midst of the fire. Again, God's in the cloud and the fire up on the mount, and his audible voice is speaking to them. And he's given them these 10 commandments that he's getting ready here in verse 6 to go over. I stood between the Lord and you at that time to show you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid by reason of the fire, and you went not up into the mountain, saying, and then again, God starts to speak in this. So Moses draws near to God, and the children of Israel retreat away from God. Boy, if that's not a statement in itself, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to draw near to God, aren't we? If you draw nigh to me, James 4:7, if you draw nigh to me, I'll draw near to you.
But they couldn't draw near to him because they were, like you said, they were in sin. He told them to stay off the mountain because of their ungodliness.
But even when he was on the mountain, they was backtracking away.
Right.
And he's going to cover that again
Wow,
here at
yeah.
the end of the chapter where he says, you know, and God says, okay, if that's what they want, I'll speak to you,
I'll just
Moses,
tell you. Yeah.
but I won't speak to the people. And now you got it that, what would you give to hear God's audible voice?
Oh my goodness.
Church today would do anything to hear it. They had it and they said, don't talk to us no more. Can you imagine? I don't want to hear you, God. And we would do anything to be able to have a conversation with God. You know, that little, just a little talk with Jesus makes me whole. Singing them.
I missed it last Sunday. You gotta sing that now.
What, singing?
I missed her singing that yesterday.
We got to hear it.
I don't see how he can have a conversation with us with the government we got right now and the way the world and the direction that we're headed. It just don't seem possible.
The conversation that he would have with us would be the one that you don't want to have.
Probably true.
Yeah, is to say, I've told you, I've warned you, and now this is what you're going to reap. This is what's coming. And again, I think it would put us so much on fear if God would tell us what his plans are. It'd be like Jeremiah. Jeremiah had every opportunity to tell the kings, to tell the people, and all he could do was cry because they would not. Jesus standing on the mount in Luke 19, he looks at Jerusalem and he weeps. And he says, you would not. You would not. You didn't know the time of your own visitation. And it slipped right through your fingers. And I think that's what he would say to us.
Well, doesn't he put everybody in power, like the presidents all around the world, the kings and stuff? I mean, from what I can remember,
He establishes all authorities, yes.
he established all authorities. Why in the heavens would he ever put people like that in power?
Gives us what we
I was
deserve.
gonna say we deserve that.
I was thinking that, but do we
Yeah.
all deserve?
Yeah.
I mean,
Me and the pastors last night, we were talking about this. You know, we have this most powerful name, Jesus. We have the promises, we have the directives. There's not one thing that's going on in our society, our nation, our community, our homes. We ought not have any drug addicts. We ought to speak the name Jesus and cast it out of them. There ought to be no addictions at all.
great.
Suicides, murder, suicides, all them deaths I was talking about. We ought to be able to get on our faces and our knees together and say, not one more. And God says, granted. But we don't. We don't.
I know we're headed for the end of time. I know that, but Satan's not on the throne yet. He's not there yet.
He
Don't
rules
we-
and
Don't we
reigns.
stand a chance of redemption?
Many are talking about is that we are on the verge of another revival because it's so dark. Dark revival always comes when it's the darkest. And we're at that point. But the question is that I've always asked and talked and pondered. God can send revival in the darkest hours. But just as I got done giving the history lesson, look how many chances he's given us.
Yes.
And then you get to the place of not revival, but you get to the place of final judgment. where God says, that's it.
More.
You don't get no more.
I don't think we're there yet. Not at the final judgment. I just don't think we're
For the
there.
world or for our nation?
I guess it could go either way, but I'm more leaning towards our nation. I mean, I know the corrupts out there, the the lesbians, queers, whatever you want to call them. We got one up here at college, which I disagree with that very wholeheartedly. I just don't understand why people like that is put in power. You just don't wipe them out. It just blows me away that Satan still gets his grips in there, and people still think that people who go to church. And I'm talking to Michelle House, and she goes to church, and she knows this stuff is not right. And I told her, I said, don't look for anything good coming out of it. I said, because it's not. I said, if anything, it'll get worse.
Mhm.
But they still believe that
there's two verses in the Old Testament. Spurgeon does a devotion on this, and it's called The Refuge of Lies, where people are anchored, refuge. And they believe this stuff. They believe, and it's not conspiracy theorists, and it's not political actions I'm talking about. I'm talking about the lies of hell that says good is evil and evil's good. We look at it and shake our head. We're thinking like you just said, how in the world can you not? But there is a world out there, and you've probably heard them interviewed, is that they don't see nothing wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. The big wheels out there, they see nothing.
But you know where it started?
wrong with that.
It started when I had a woman, a mother, write me. She was on my prayer email list, and this was about 12 years ago. And she wrote me, and she said, "Don't send me any more prayer emails." She's like, "Because I know what you're saying is truth. I know what you're saying is biblical, but I want you to know what my son and my daughter are." So what she did was she picked her son and her daughter in sin, in the LGBT, and said, "I got to bless them rather than what God says." And that showed me right there, where we was going. If people that are sitting in church do that, you can't expect a lost person to know any better.
Right.
But the church should know better.
Right.
And that's the reason all these denominations are split.
Well, I know it's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah because of the adultery and the lesbian and the homosexuals and whatever else was going on in there. And I've been studying the Ten Commandments and trying to memorize them in order. Really have that. Why is, I was thinking, why are they not something in the Ten Commandments states about lesbian and
Well, it's not in the Ten Commandments, but it's in
homosexual, but
Leviticus.
it's also in, that's what is it? It's in your wedding vows, I think, someplace, or something to do with the wedding vows, man and the woman joined together.
What God has joined together, let not man put asunder.
Yeah, and that's the only place other than Sodom and Gomorrah that I can find anything relating to the whatever queers.
Romans.
Doesn't sexual immortality doesn't that fall under that? Immorality?
Well, it says
Of
not.
what extent?
Of like being gay and lesbian and stuff, doesn't that fall under
You
sexual?
have in the book of Leviticus, there's a verse that goes back to back like this. Now again, we're going to get to the seventh commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay? That's the first basic act of sexual immorality. Okay? Husband and wife.
That's a man and a woman.
Man and a woman, which God says in Genesis, he said, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cling to his wife. Adam and Eve, man and woman. That was God's intent. All right. So then he says, because what are the children of Israel doing? What's the nations of the world doing? They're sleeping with anybody. They're, marriage vows don't mean nothing. So let's just do whatever we want to do. So it becomes a sin. Now, you got people and they'll say, well, we're not married and we're allowed to do this. No, fornication is as much condemned as adultery, isn't it?
Yeah.
So marriage vows or before marriage, all right? Our moral code in our United States used to be that way, where there was shame, there was remorse, and now anything goes with this. Now, that's the first verse in Leviticus. I think it's chapter 15 or 16. And he says, thou shalt not commit adultery. The very next verse, he says, and I suffer not a man to sleep with a man. In that, these are abominations in my sight: adultery and sodomy, homosexuality. Then you jump over to where you go from Sodom and Gomorrah, which that was not their only sin. They were proud. They didn't take care of the people. They took advantage of the poor. There were a lot of sins. And again, we know that they couldn't find 10 righteous. That's why God destroyed it, right? But if you found 10, they wouldn't have been destroyed. Then you come over to Romans, and you have that again, where he says, where men do burn in their hearts one towards another. In that. And a woman does not use her natural ability, but it's woman with woman. And it was pure debauchery in this. Then Paul writes in Galatians chapter 6 or chapter 5, where he says the fruits of the flesh. You remember the fruits of the flesh? There's 13 of those. And in that, he says that there is this sexual immorality of lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is that appetite cannot be satisfied. That's our society. The addiction of pornography. Again, the perversions of anything goes, where they got all their different terminology now. You can't even keep up with their terminology. I'll tell you one term. It's lasciviousness. And again, I can't say it that well, and it doesn't roll off my tongue that well, but that's what it is. It is the appetite for sexual desire that cannot be satisfied. This is a fruit of the flesh. And there are other things there: adultery, fornication, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. All these things are termed, but that lasciviousness is what we're talking about, the sexual immorality, is that they cannot pull back. There was a code. Again, someone posted on Facebook. They posted, I think it was that Gary Pope that posted those pictures out of Tri-Towns in Westernport, and they were down there at the skating rink. The young men they're skating. They're at the skating rink. This is a picture from the 1950s or whatever it was. They're in suits. The girls are in dresses, and they're in this, again, chivalry, properness of how you do and how you treat each other in that. It was a code of conduct. And now where's that? It's gone. You can't even imagine the stuff that goes on that you hear about Morgantown and WVU. You just can't, because again, it is debauchery. Wickedness has prevailed in us. Why? Because God's law, statutes, commandments, testimonies did not matter to people today, not even in the church. Because again, if we try to bring discipline in the church upon someone that's committing one of these things, saying, look, this is not the way a Christian acts. What do? They get mad and they'll go to a church that accepts it and blesses it. And so again, what good does discipline do? I like some of the pastors around here, like if you would get mad at me and go to their church because you was mad at me, I know like Jody and Randy Letterman would be like, what are you doing? You go back and submit yourself like you're supposed to. And again, and if someone do that here, no, we ain't doing that. We're not playing church hopping. We support one another in that. Now we can't do that with all the pastors and all the churches because they're not on board like that. But this is a lot of things that goes on. There's a right and there's a wrong, and these are the commandments that God gives to us. I'm not going to go through all the 10 commandments because we did this back when we did Genesis and Exodus 1 through 20. But close out our time here. I just want to go down through them, and it ends in verse 21, and that's where I'll stop tonight. So verse 6, we start. I am the Lord thy God, and I've given you that title. What's your name? I am that I am. Okay, Jehovah. Which brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And again, we don't need to repeat all that again. Did it with 10 plagues, did it after 400 years. They went down 70 into Egypt, and they come out 603,550 men. He begins, verse 7, first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And nothing of this world comes before God, not just the false idols. Second commandment, verse 8, thou shalt not make unto me any graven image. These are the false idols. Molech, Baal, Ashtaroth, any of those false gods, I call them tiki gods, that they would bow down to, offer their sacrifices, or do any of this. Don't make anything as an image and bow down to it. Things of heaven, sun, moon, stars, or things on earth, plants, trees, animals, or other men. That's the reason you don't bow down to the fat little golden man, Buddha. I always just love saying that. They don't bow down to him, but they institute that worship of Buddhism. Or that is in the waters beneath, fish, whales, shark. What's that song that you guys always sing? Baby Shark. That Cole Daniel loves to sing in that. You ever seen a fixation on sharks as what's in our society today? Broadcast television shows. I can't even keep up with all this stuff. It all started with Jaws.
Jaws.
Back in
Right.
77. So anyway, no image, no false idols. Verse 9, thou shalt not bow down to them nor serve them. And again, they do that because they take away from God's tithes and offerings and things and give it to those things which are man-made. I am the Lord your God, and I am a jealous God. We saw that. And again, there's a place here in Deuteronomy, jealous is capital J.
Yeah.
So that's a proper name for him. And I will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children into the third and fourth generation of those that hate me. Very severe warning there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our descendants, our offspring, that God says, you hate me, you don't want to serve me. This is our society. And again, post-World War II, this is where it started. I remember Uncle Waco, me and him was sitting on the front pew down there at Danville, and he looked at me with tears in his eyes. And he said, I want you to forgive me. And I was like, what'd you do to me? He said, my generation has caused this mess that you're in. I've never had anybody address it that way or acknowledge it that way. But generation from generation has passed this along. And you hate me. And you know what I'm going to do? 3 or 4 generations down your line, I'm going to judge because of this. This is severe. And people don't like this, but this is the reality that we're living. I will show mercy unto those thousands of those that love me. This is Exodus 34, where God pronounces his name. The Lord God, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, keeping mercy with thousands, and to those that keep my commandments. Learn, keep, and do. Can I stress that enough? Learn, keep, and do. Make you chant that. Learn, keep, and do. Learn, keep,
and do.
Okay.
Learn, keep, and do.
All right.
Learn, keep, and do.
And showing mercy unto them that keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. This third commandment. You do not say God, Lord, Jesus Christ. You don't say, oh my God. You don't say, oh Lord. In the vain petitions that they say today, I hear Christians doing this. If you ain't talking to God, if you're not talking about God, then don't you speak his name. It's a holy name. It's a reverent name. And it's not to be taken in profanity. In our society today, they love to do it. And I said this a week or two ago. Why don't they take Buddha's name in vain? Why don't they take Allah's name or Islam or Muhammad's name in vain? Why does it always have to be our Lord and our Jesus? Because the enemy's doing it. He's instigating. All right. Fourth commandment, verse 12, keep the Sabbath day to sanctify it, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days to labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. And that comes back from Genesis chapter 1 in creation and Genesis chapter 2. But in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus comes along when they criticized him because he healed on Sunday, because the disciples plucked the corn on the Sabbath, and he healed the man's hand on the Sabbath. And they said, do you not know that I am the Lord of the Sabbath? I am Lord of every day. It's my days. I determine what you do. And the church in the book of Acts, they stopped meeting on the Sabbath and they started meeting on the Lord's day. And again, it's not that this is undone. The Sabbath day, the 6 days of work and the seventh day of rest was because God gave it as a gift to men that we didn't wear ourselves out. We're not supposed to work 7 days. We're not supposed to work another. Our bodies can't keep up that way. God rested, and he said, you will rest. It's just that it transitioned from the Old Testament to the New Testament in that. Verse 16, fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be prolonged. And you know that the term honor was changed in obedience, obey in this. Preference. Do you honor those who disobey God? If Georgie would say, we're not going to serve God anymore in this household, and I say, well, our wedding vow said is that, we have to be amicable and in agreement and all those kind of things, then what am I doing? I'm putting the marriage over God, aren't I? If you have a husband or a wife that tries to change you from worshiping God, God comes first, and the relationship comes second. And it's the same thing with a father or a mother. If the father or the mother dictates and says, you don't have to worship the Lord, you don't have to serve, or they're lost or whatever, God still comes first. Priorities, God always comes first. And you keep it that way. Huh?
Even though they're not worth it. Even though the parents is not worth it. I mean,
if the parents are lost, then again, responsibility if the child becomes saved, just as if the husband or the wife is saved and their other spouse is lost, the Bible says you pray for them and you set that example. Apostle Paul says, no, who knows? Your witness might lead them to Christ. But you don't obey and honor and follow that which God doesn't honor. Right?
Yeah, but I didn't know the commandments. I didn't know this back when I was a kid. I didn't get
right
programming
and again
much later. And I think when I finally understood whether they were worth it or not, I gave them the honor and the respect that they deserved according to God's law.
Right.
But in the beginning, I hate to say it's about mom too, but they really was not worth it because neither one of them knew right from wrong, in my opinion. Not from what I know now.
Yeah. And if they don't know, then again, it doesn't mean that you compromise your faith in Christ or any of that. You keep them at that place where they're at. And again, it's a little bit different if they are saved. If everybody's saved, then it's bliss. It's the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
But that's not the way for most families that it is.
Right.
And that doesn't matter whether it's the parent and the child or the grandparents or whether it's the siblings or whether it's that. God comes first and the honor comes out of that. Which again, this reference of honor, respect, as you said, or what was changed out to obey your parents is what was changed in the mindset of the teachings of the church.
We obeyed, but I mean, we listened because we didn't take it to the woodshed. You know,
punishment.
Did that all.
So,
oh, sorry.
am I going to be accountable for what I didn't do back then, or am I accountable for when
Accountable.
This hit me in the face?
Accountable if it was, again, to say, take out the trash, make your bed, do your chores, whatever, that's one thing. But if it was instructions to do sin or to commit sin,
Not
then,
knowing what right from wrong, we was not taught.
then again, God holds an accountability that when you didn't know. But when you do know,
Accountability to who?
accountable to God on what's right and what's wrong. God knows whether you knew what was right or wrong. God holds a person. God doesn't judge us the same as he does those people that don't have a Bible, does he?
No.
No, there's a difference. And God judges rightly. And he will do the same in that. You didn't know, you weren't taught, no one was there to instruct you. It's not going to hold that person accountable that someone was like, for me, that was taught since the time I was a child. I was in church from 2 weeks old on up. I was taught. I'm without excuse. I knew. To him that knows to do good and does not do it, to him it's sin. But when you don't know, God holds a different accountability on that.
Well, that's where I was at with it, but one to make 100% sure.
Yeah, that's right. Georgia, you start to say.
I was asking about that scripture, but I just found it. It's in 1 Samuel 15:22, where it says to obey is better than sacrifice.
Yes.
The importance of obedience and how that's
God requires that.
over everything else.
Yeah. just to be respectful or dutiful or whatever is different with that, because Saul said, oh, well, I did what I was supposed to do. And he said, no, you didn't honor me
Right,
in that.
so that was when he offered that, yeah, okay.
He kept
Well,
the sheep for the best
yeah,
offerings,
right,
he
right,
said.
right.
But,
I got you.
okay.
This came up.
all right,
Sorry.
real quick. 6, thou shalt not kill, verse 17. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. 20, and again, bear false witness is lie. Thou shalt not lie. And then 21 is do not covet. Do not look at your neighbor's possessions, wife. Don't covet what they got, their house, their field, manservants, maidservants, any of their animals, and say, boy, I wish I had that. Be content with whatever you got and be happy in that. So we'll stop there on 22. And again, 22, down to the end of the chapter. There's only 2 sections on this. So we'll pick up with that next week. Questions? Comments? All right. Those of you online, we will, again, Thursday, 7 o'clock, we're going to try to do the hour of prayer, post on that to make sure, try to do the Google Meet so we can do the corporate praying and see if we can get a couple of the prayer leaders to join us for that. And then Sunday services, first Sunday of the month and second Sunday of Advent for that. And can go ahead and read chapter 5, chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, and you'll be up for the study here to stay ahead of us where we're at and what we're going to get into with that. So good night and God bless.